I'm Pastor Jonathan Steeper from Kalihi Union Church. Do you ever take things personally? I mean, where it kind of cuts through to the heart of who you are. Like if someone says, I really don't like your nose. Well, would you take that personally? I know I would. But some things sort of slide off on the outside, and some things we take a little more deeply. Like when you look at a painting and someone says, oh, what a beautiful painting that is. Or, I don't really like that painting, but when they don't know that you're the one that actually painted it, it becomes a lot more personal. Today I want to talk about our personal relationship with God, because God takes us far more personally, I think, than we take Him. And God really cares about how we respond to Him. And we're in a series on Acts chapter 2, where we see the pouring out of the Holy Spirit. God sends His Holy Spirit. Him personally, God personally comes to us, and He comes to empower and to transform our lives so that we can live according to the life of Jesus and the holiness of Jesus, the forgiveness of sin, the joy of walking with Him, and we can live even eternally with this personal bond and relationship with the Lord. In Acts chapter 2, as we continue in this sermon that Peter gives explaining the outpouring of the Holy Spirit to this birth of the church, here is talking to his church. This is the brand new infant-born church, and he says in Acts chapter 2, verse 22, "Men of Israel, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles and wonders and signs which God did among you through Him, and you yourselves know." Wow, this is a very personal God speaking to you and to me in the same way that Peter was speaking directly to the church. Just want to highlight that God takes our response to Him very personally. How are you responding to Him? How have you responded to Jesus? How do you respond to His Word? How do you respond when you're at church and you're worshiping? How do you respond when you go outside and it's beautiful? And are you responding to Him? Because He takes it very personally. When you look at His sky and you look at His flowers and His stars and His beaches, and you say, "Lord, thank you," or are you just going to say, I don't really care? Our response is personal, but how much more when we talk about Jesus and we talk about what He has done for us. See, it says in Acts chapter 2 that God accredited it to He accredited Jesus to us by miracles, wonders, and signs. That's like God taking His stamp of approval. In the old days, they would pour out wax. Maybe we'll do that for you later. They'd pour out wax, and they would take their ring and they would press it in as a personal seal. Here God personally sealed His reputation on the credibility of His Son, saying, "This is the one you can trust. This is my Son. This is the Messiah. This is the one with whom I am well pleased." And He did it by miracles. And we think of Jesus healing the sick, and we think of Jesus casting out demons. We think of that man who was demonized in the graveyard, would cut himself and harm people, and Jesus walked up in confidence and cast out the legion of demons into the pigs, and they all ran down into the lake and died. Or we think of the wonders of Jesus when He was in a storm and all of His disciples were on the boat and they were drowning and they were afraid the boat was going to be filled with water, and Jesus walks to them in the storm and He calls Peter out. The miracles and the wonders, or we think of the signs when Jesus had 5,000 men and women and children, and He fed them with a couple of loaves of bread and fish, and all of them were fed and satisfied. And God said that all of these things were really His seal through Jesus, that this was His Son, and that we could trust Him and we should receive Him and serve and honor Him. This man, accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, and God did all these among you. It's very personal. God's saying, how will you respond to what I have shown to you? How are you going to bow the knee to Jesus that I have placed my seal of approval on him? I have given my personal letter of reference for him, and I've demonstrated this to you countless times. God takes our response personally, and yet, what did they do to Jesus? It says, you crucified him. It says, this man was handed over to you by God's set purpose, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. You rejected him. You crucified him. You put him to death. You literally nailed Christ to the cross. And you say, well, I didn't nail Christ to the cross. I wasn't even alive. Well, God takes it very personally, because when we reject Jesus and his offer of salvation, we are in fact nailing him to the cross as much as the Jews who yelled, crucify him, crucified him, and as much as the soldiers who were obeying their officers, and they mocked him and took that sledgehammer and nailed those nails to the hands and feet of Jesus into the cross. God takes it personally. He says, you did it. And I say, what? Me? He says, yes, you have rejected Jesus. You say, how have I rejected Jesus? How did I nail him to the cross? Every time we reject God's offer of forgiveness, that Jesus is a substitute for our sin. Every time we reject that we need Jesus. Every time we reject that we need his forgiveness so that sin even exists in our lives, we are nailing Christ to the cross. God takes it very personally how we respond to Jesus. But then it says in Acts chapter 2 that God personally raised his son to life. In verse 24 it says, but God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep hold on him. God personally takes our response very personally. Why? Because God had this close, intimate, personal relationship with his son Jesus. And so is it any wonder here that we see God personally raising Jesus from the dead? Just like a father going over and finding their child, and the child is limp, and the child is hurt and maybe unconscious, that father going and raising up that child with passion and compassion in their heart. Well, how much more if that child was dead? And here, God is personally raising his son Jesus from the grave and from the cross. It says in verse 24 that it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. The Father raised Jesus from the agony of death, all the agony that he went through on the cross. Why? It was impossible for death to hold Jesus. Why? He's the Holy One. How could sin hold the Holy Son of God? How could the mortal hold on to that which is immortal and eternal? How could something created hold on to the very one who created all things? How could darkness lay hold onto light? It was not possible. The Spirit of life in Jesus swallowed up death, and the Father raised up his Son personally. But also it says that God could not abandon Jesus. In verse 27, Peter is here quoting Psalm 16, where it says, you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. God is such a deep love for Jesus that he could never abandon him. How could he abandon his body to decay? How could he abandon him to hell? No. Here the Father personally raises up Jesus, and he would not abandon him. And I have this compost pile of worms, and when you open it up, oh, it's so gross because you got all these different bugs and worms, and they are just chewing up all of that compost from our kitchen. and they're just chewing it up and they're eating it up. And that's decay. There's nothing pretty about decay. And God said, in his personal love for his Son, he would not abandon the Holy One, the Messiah of the world, to decay, but he raised him to life. For 3 days, Jesus lay in that tomb. And then the Father raised him to life again. And it says when he raised him, he exalted his Son to the place of honor at his right hand. And so not only did God raise Jesus from the grave, but he exalted him to the right hand of honor and of power, where he would literally make his enemies a footstool. It says in verse 36, let all Israel be assured, and you can be assured of this. I can be assured of this. God has made this Jesus whom you crucified. Oh, that cuts. It's so personal. God has made this Jesus whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. Can you feel the trembling? You see, it is personal because it's about a relationship. It's about a relationship with God. And God in this relationship sent Jesus to us, that we may know his love, that we may receive his love, that we may welcome him. But God's people rejected him, nailed him to the cross, crucified him, spat on him, mocked him. And now God offers grace and mercy. And he offers his Holy Spirit to us. And he takes our response very personally. It is personal. It's personal what you say. It's personal whether you respond. It's personal whether you don't respond. You know, we hold lots of parties and we invite people to our home, and we invite them because we care and we love them. And if someone says, you know, I'd love to come but I really can't, well, we receive that personally. Well, thank you. Thank you for thinking about it. But if someone never even responds, you kind of say, well, that's really not very nice. You know, and we wish that they would respond, and we try not to take it personally, but if someone who's really close to you, if someone who's your family, if someone who's your best friend, when they don't respond, we take it personally. And God takes your response and my response to him. Whether that is a yes, Lord, he just is so excited, or whether it's I don't care, Lord, or whether it's a no, don't bother me, it touches his heart. And if you're not sure about that, you look at this passage in Acts chapter 2. We're going to take a little bit more about what it did to the people that were listening. It says they were cut to the heart. Join me in the next section.
I want to know you face to face, kneel at the throne of grace, for grace is making my heart brand new. Fill me with love and truth till I finally see